Coming at you live from all over Ohio. A Cleveland Browns podcast full of laughs, rants, fun, and stats. A place where all Browns fans' voices are welcome and heard. A show that aims to inform and entertain you. With your hosts, Jacob, Nick, and Ed. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Barking Browns Show.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome into the second episode of my solo series. We're going to focus on a position on the offensive side of the ball. If you haven't checked it out already, in the past week, I released the grading of the edge room part 1. Today, we will do grading of the offensive tackle part 1. We're going to do 2 to 3 players and kind of talk about their careers, talk about if the Browns need to add anybody to position groups, give them an A, a B, a C individually as well as the room, and kind of just go through them and just talk about where each position stands. This is the second episode. I'll do 3 players today. We're going to do Big Jed, Jack Conklin, and then we will do Chris Hubbard as we start with the tackles. And we'll go back and forth, and most of these will be 2-3 parts. And you know, I just think they're a really quick-hitting 15, 20-minute podcast. We just talk about one position group and just kind of where I sit and what I think and how I project those players this year, and if it is a position of strength, weakness, or whatever in between. So before we jump into it, I just need to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar. Guys, I know I've said it, and it's repetitive, but they are hands down the best protein bars on the market. It's like eating a Three Musketeers bar, except it's not loaded with a bunch of additives and sugar. Legit amount of protein, legit amount of calories. It's sweet, tastes good. It's like a treat, and it helps you hit those fitness goals. So if you are interested, that it's not chalky. Remember that. That's the best part. They're not chalky protein bars. So go to built.com, BUILT.com, and use the promo code BARKING, BARKING, for 10% off today at built.com. All right, guys, we are going to launch right into the offensive tackles position. I spoke a little bit on Sports for CLE earlier this week about Jed Wills and about some of the slander I've seen from Jed Wills, which I think is a little exaggerated, a little over the top, a little bit unnecessary. So we're going to start with Jed. As I do these solo series, I'm going to go with some of the data and the PFF grades and some of that stuff as we try to look at these guys. So Jed ends up playing 763 snaps and allows 5 sacks. 763 snaps at left tackle. You're looking at 5 sacks allowed in 437 pass block sets. 5 sacks, 4 hits, 28 total pressures allowed by Jed, a 66 overall, including a 67.9 in pass blocking and a 61.7 in run blocking. So here's the thing. We talk about the injuries with Baker Mayfield. We talk about the injuries with Jarvis Landry. We talk about injuries. If you talk about the 2021 Cleveland Browns, you're probably talking about injuries at some point. My friend, and we talked about this on the main channel on the Barking Brown Show a couple of weeks ago, Andy Manchin, his seats are right behind the Browns bench where the offensive linemen sit. And he pointed this out, and I sat in those seats at one point, but he pointed out for the entirety of that season that injury to Jed Wills was significant. That he just looked like he was in excruciating pain when he came off the field, that he genuinely wasn't talking to people sometimes. He was just trying to get, that leg to hold on the field. I think if Chris Hubbard is healthy, that's what we're going to get to when we talk about with Chris Hubbard. They wanted so badly to limp, because when Chris Hubbard goes down 2 in that Kansas City game, they wanted to get Chris Hubbard back. He ends up having to have triceps surgery and only playing in that one game. I truly believe if Chris Hubbard doesn't get hurt, probably week 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5, about a month or so starting at week 2, I think that Jed would have sat. He may have even gone on IR. I just don't think they felt comfortable at left tackle with anybody not named Jedrick Wills or Chris Hubbard until they were forced to do it, until they were forced to have Blake Hance out there, until they were forced to slide Joel Bitonio over there. So when the season began, they wanted it to be one of those two, just like they thought a hurt Baker Mayfield was better than a healthy Case Keenum. I believe they thought a hurt, Jedrick Wills was better than anybody else not named Chris Hubbard at left tackle. So we got to remember some of that stuff. You got to remember how significant this injury was. And, when you're talking about an ankle injury for a man that is 320 pounds in a scheme where he needs to be athletic and move, it just, like, if he has a hand injury, granted he needs to use his hands, but if he's got like some kind of arm or upper body that would hinder a quarterback, but maybe not hinder him, that's one thing. But that ankle, that base, an ankle and a knee, either one of those for an offensive lineman, it just completely deteriorates that year. And I look back to 2020 where some of his run blocking was not great, but his pass blocking in 2020 was a 79.4. He only allowed 18 pressures and 4 sacks. And some people forget he had to switch from right tackle to left tackle, and some suggest that it wasn't that bad because he was a blind side on the right. No, he's literally doing everything the exact polar opposite that he had to do. His sets are not with his right leg out anymore. They're his left. Literally, Joe Thomas compared it to wiping your butt with the opposite hand after your whole life you wiped it with your right hand. Now you're wiping it with your left. It's going to be a massive adjustment. And yes, Bill Callahan was there, but they didn't have in-person off-season. That was 2020. The draft wasn't in person. They weren't in person until training camp. I don't know that they had a single in-person workout prior to training camp. And he made that change, and his pass sets were some of the best pass sets. Think about this: 18 pressures, 5 hits, 4 sacks. 18 pressures in 507 pass blocking snaps. 18. He lost 18 reps. And even last year, when he struggles a little bit, only 28 pressures. Only 28 pressures, granted, in 70 less snaps. But it's still not that bad. He is a good player. Jedrick Wills, I would expect Jed to grade in the mid-70s this year. I think a jump. He was still 66.1 and a 67 pass block. I expect him to be borderline 80 in the pass blocking again. I have zero concerns about Jed. He looks lean. He looks healthy in the offseason program. I think that he's not necessarily going to be a top 10 player this year, but he will not be anywhere close to a problem on the field. I think some of this exaggeration and not looking at some of the accomplishments that he has made. Now, if he goes out there and he struggles again this year and he's healthy, then maybe it wasn't the injury last year. But all the data, all the stats, all the film, Andy, my buddy Andy, literally seeing him dragging his leg shows you that it just was more significant than we believe. We said that with Baker Mayfield. I think there's more to just that. There was more to Baker's struggles than his injury, but that was why they couldn't do certain things that he did do successfully the year before because of the torquing and the issues with that. And that is just, you cannot at that size have a hurt ankle like that and be productive. So I'm not worried about Jed. I'm not sure he's a Pro Bowler necessarily or anything like that, but he'll be, he'll be in the top 15 at tackle, maybe top 10. He's definitely got the ability to be a top 10. I mean, at worst, I think he'll be the 15th best tackle in football at the left, on the left tackle side. I don't think you should be worried about Jedrick Wills at left tackle this season. All right, guys, let's move on to the other side, our number 2 tackle, so to speak. I'm trying to go with the top guys. Maybe it's a little different in these where you have to have 2 starters at all times with tackles. And then we'll go to the first guy. We're going to go to Jack Conklin, who ends up only playing 361 snaps. I talked about this on Sports for CLE in an article that I wrote in the past week. The only concern I have with Jack Conklin is health. It's not just because of accumulation of injuries. Conklin's still, he's about to turn 28 in August, right before the season. He will turn 28. Oh, actually on my co-host Nick Karn's birthday, which is also my little brother Nick, his birthday. Interestingly enough. How about that? So he's about to turn 28. So he's still, in a good spot at his career. But 361 snaps, he ends up playing a 78.8 overall, including where he continues to just be really, really good, an 86 run blocking grade. He allows 2 sacks and 8 pressures with a 63.8 pass rushing grade. He's always a better, I think, let me look back at 2020 on him. He was a better pass blocker in his all-pro season than he was run blocking. But I've always thought, personally, when watching him, I'm more impressed with what he does in the run game than the pass game. But he's not an issue. You look at him in 2 years in Cleveland. In 2020, he plays 556 pass blocking snaps, allows 5 pressures. And then last year, in 186, he allowed 8. Wow. So he did struggle a little bit more last year, allowing more pressures in like 400 less snaps. That's always interesting to look at some of those data points. So 2 penalties, 2 sacks, 8 pressures, no hits on Jack Conklin. The thing is the patellar, man, if it was any other injury like Jed, I'm not worried about that high ankle sprain. That is just something you have to get off your feet and let heal. And the amount of time that he has had is more than sufficient to get that healed. The patellar, man, I kept seeing when it happened 6 to 12 or more months. Now, the Browns are saying all the right things for making you feel good about Jack Conklin being back. They're telling you, he's on track. He should be good for training camp. I personally don't have any reason to believe he won't be there week 1, but I also think there's a good shot that maybe week 5 is the real target, and that you're looking at potentially Chris Hubbard being your right tackle for the first month. It's a little bit of an easier first month. We've talked about that over and over when it comes to the Deshaun Watson suspension and how the Browns can potentially tread water to make the playoffs. And I think that's the same situation that comes here with Jack Conklin. I think that you're looking at a guy that may miss a month or so to get ready. And I think he could be a slow starter. I wrote about this. I think that he is an athletic guy. Why he was such a great signing was not just because he was a good tackle, it was because he was a great tackle in the scheme that Kevin Stefanski loves, in that zone blocking, wide zone scheme. Now, they do more, it's not as much wide zone as some people think, but there's a lot of zone blocking concepts, and he is one of the more athletic and nimble right tackles at 308 pounds, 6'6", that you're going to find. And that's where I'm concerned with Conklin, is because it is a knee injury. Could affect his mobility, could affect his athleticism. Even when he's back, I think he'll be fine, but I don't think whenever his first game is, especially if it's week 1, I think you could potentially not see him be an all-pro like he was in 2020, at least out the gate. Maybe has to shake some of that rust off. But even like last year's Jack Conklin, who wasn't quite as good because the year before he was in the mid-80s overall, but you're looking at him last year where he's was 63 in pass blocking, but only allowed 8 total pressures. He may be something like that, where he's just not refined, and his run blocking grade's probably not going to be in the high 80s like it was last year out the gate because of that patellar. You're just looking at, like I said with Jed, that the ankle just needs time, but ankle and knee injuries, if they linger for guys that are 300 plus pounds, especially one that relies a ton on athleticism and being able to move and climb to the next level, kind of like Jack Conklin does, it's a lot of concern. I don't have long-term concerns for the season for Jack Conklin, but if he starts week 1, I have concerns about the first 2 or 3 games, about if he can be as effective. And now, that being said, will he be better than what we had at times at tackle last year when him and Jed were out? Yes. He would be the best man for the job if he is healthy. If not, it'll probably be Chris Hubbard. We're going to talk about him here in just a second as we wrap up my solo series, episode 2, talking about the offensive tackles, 3 offensive tackles as we continue to just move right around here during the NFL dead season period. And I just think that overall, this team has consecutively looked at being not aggressive, the opposite of aggressive, just being really smart, patient. There we go. Being patient with injuries. We saw it last offseason and preseason where you saw some guys just not play, not practice because they weren't 100%, even though maybe they were 50 or 80%. And, they held some guys out of some games. I thought Nick Chubb got held out of one game when I really thought he was going to play because I think it was just a stinger, and then he ends up missing that game, comes back with a vengeance. I think they're very patient with injuries overall. The Baker situation and the Jed situation I thought was out of necessity. I think both of them, they felt like they had to. It was the only way they were going to compete. They didn't feel comfortable competing with Case Keenum. They would rather have hurt Baker Mayfield. But overall, when guys have lingering injuries from last year, you saw it with Odell, where they just kind of wanted to make sure he's 100%. When Conklin's back out there, I think they will be perfectly fine. I'm not concerned long time yet. But if he gets out there and he gets hurt again in the first half of the season, I know this is last year of his contract, but you never know what they could do in the future. If he gets hurt again, though, I think you can pretty much end his career in Cleveland. I think overall Conklin will be just fine. I think they're saying he looks good. He's been in the building. He's been rehabbing. He's one of the harder workers in the NFL. So I'm not too awfully worried, but I could legitimately see a very slow start for him. And maybe not starting week 1. I forgot to give it. Jed, I give him a B-. Conklin, when healthy, is a B+. Let's move on to our final guy of the day, and that's Chris Hubbard. Chris Hubbard last year ends up only playing the 39 snaps at left tackle week 1, and then he never plays again. If I remember correctly, three pressures, 1 sack, a 51 overall, a 42 pass blocking, and 53 run blocking. And I don't think he was even really healthy for most of that game. It seemed to be a little bit of a struggle. There is major concern for me here when it comes to the injury bug. Because, you talk about the accumulation of injuries with Jack Conklin because he got injured twice, and then the big one being the patellar. They don't always worry me if it's somewhat minor injuries leading up to the big one, whereas Chris Hubbard has now had back-to-back season-ending surgeries, one of which comes early in the year. One of us a little bit later, the knee situation against the Giants late in 2020, which is potentially why he was slow in training camp to get up to speed and some things like that. And they really ended up needing him in week 1, and I don't think he was ready for that. The one good thing is you're looking at it as a tricep. You're not looking at it as a mobility thing. Yes, obviously you need the tricep to be healed. But it sounds like he's 100%. So it's not adding up on the same. It's not like back-to-back knees on the same leg or a knee on one side, a knee on the other. Just like the same types of injuries that kind of accumulate and add up. Because Conklin, both of his injuries last year were lower body injuries. So I'm not too awfully worried if he's 100%. But I just don't know how much more his body can take at 31 years old in back-to-back surgeries to end his season. I'm really, really worried. But I go back to 2020 and I think, man, I don't know that they played the playoffs without Chris Hubbard because of what he gave them. Listen, 71.9 overall in 2020, 78 in pass blocking, 64 in run blocking. You look at him, he plays 290 total snaps. 224 at right guard, 62 at right tackle, and 4 at left tackle. Ends up with 7 pressures and no sacks. That's your fifth lineman, who has now been. He hasn't been at left guard yet, but he's played one of the guards. So we've seen him at 3 of the 5 positions in 2020 and allow no sacks and 7 pressures and no penalties. That 2020, I know it was only 290, about 300 snaps from Chris Hubbard. That is as good. That is a dream swing tackle. He is a dream swing tackle. If he is healthy, he has to be on the roster. I'm concerned long-term where he is after this year because of those accumulation of some big major season-ending injuries coming back-to-back like that. Excuse me, guys. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Let me get some water real quick. Talking too much. Even myself revolted against all of the talking that I'm doing right now, right? Okay, apologies. If you look at Chris Hubbard, I don't know that a backup tackle can give you what Chris Hubbard gave you in 2020, if he can be back to that. And of course, he ends up playing majority at right guard with some injuries to Wyatt Teller. Just some big snaps from him, some big games. I'm so sorry, guys. We're going to wrap this thing up here. As far as it goes, sorry about that. I was eating some almonds, and I think I got some in the back of my throat. So let's wrap this thing up. As far as third tackles, swing players go, it's a B+. So top of the tackles are B's for me, B- for Jed, B+ for Conklin, he's healthy. B plus for Hubbard if he's healthy. Hope to talk to you guys again soon. Make sure you hit that like, comment, subscribe, and talk to you guys soon. Go Browns.